Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for the first of what will be many lively discussions about the intersection of marketing and publishing, hosted by Reuters. Reuters has been the Intel Inside, helping publishers for 163 years. First via telegraph, helping print newspapers, then broadcasters, large digital media platforms such as Microsoft and Yahoo and others, and now brands, as they increasingly become publishers in their own right. Reuters has a key role to play and is super excited to help them in the very same way we've been helping other publishers for over 160 years. We have a great lineup tonight, and I'm very excited to hear the energetic debate on some very timely and relevant topics. And I'm happy to announce that our moderator tonight will be Chuck Salter. Chuck is a senior editor at Fast Company, where he's profiled many of the world's most innovative companies and entrepreneurs as a longtime award-winning journalist. Currently, he's responsible for creating new storytelling formats and platforms such as Live Narratives, in which he directs and performs feature stories on stages at conferences. And I'm told it's kind of a mashup between magazines, radio, and theater. And I personally can't wait to see one myself. I haven't yet, but it sounds extraordinarily compelling. He's also developing an online video series for Fast Company and overseeing its line of e-books. Throughout his career, his work has appeared on This American Life in the New York Times Magazine, Sports Illustrated, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and many, many more. And early on in his career, he was a newspaper reporter for about 8 years. So he's clearly highly qualified to be our moderator tonight. Please join me in warmly welcoming Chuck Salter.
Thanks, everybody. I like the fact that we're calling this a mashup. Even you can tell from the thing that I do with Live Narrative, I'm a big fan of this sort of combination of unusual elements. And that's really what we have here. It is this, it's a mashup, it's a collision, or to borrow the phrase of, or the description from someone here on the panel, and you can try to figure out who it is shortly. This is like taking two supposed enemies, the marketer and the journalist, the wolf and the sheepdog, and you put them in the same room. You put them in a bedroom, and then they have a baby. And a really interesting creature results from that. It's this crazy alchemy. And I don't really know what to call it. Maybe it's sheepdog. I'm totally up for some sort of brainstorm of what we're going to call this thing. But we're going to explore tonight kind of what this is, what it does, this creature, and the world, the environment in which it is thriving and growing like crazy. And really what that means for marketing and for advertising and for journalism. So we put together a panel that can really address this from multiple perspectives, media, brands, advertising. And I'm just going to go down the line here for quick introductions. Rena Jenna leads a content and editorial strategy team at IBM Studio and is an executive editor of Think Leaders, a C-suite thought leadership platform produced by IBM, so she can give us a brand perspective. We've got Stephanie Fleischman, the director of ad innovation at the New York Times. She oversees new branded content initiatives for T Brand Studio. That's the Times in-house creative agency. We've got Ben Dar. He's the co-founder of Brandtail, native advertising and discovery research platform. It's the first site to aggregate branded content. And let's see, we've got Jessica April, the global head of strategic partnerships for Reuters, where she oversees content marketing group, as well as new partnerships with key brand customers. She's very experienced in advertising, print, and digital media. And on the end, we have Tyler Gray. Tyler heads up Edelman's creative newsroom, where he helps conceive, create, and promote stories really on all platforms and all different formats. And he has 20 years as a journalist, so we have that perspective as well from newspapers and magazines. And what strikes me about this space is that inherently it requires evolution by organizations and by individuals. And I'm going to really kind of start out with two stories of evolution. The first one about the New York Times. Because Stephanie, I feel like I know the first time I heard that the Times was doing custom content, branded content, we can talk a little bit more about our terminology because I know it does vary a good bit. was surprised and I was intrigued about how it worked. I was surprised until I then looked around and realized, wait, everybody's doing this now. Of course you're doing it, but how are you doing it? So I'm curious to hear, how did T Brand Studios come about, and what sort of internal debate was there as this was getting off the ground?
You know, at the outset of this panel, you know, mentioned that Reuters has been around for about 160 years. So too has the New York Times, and you know, with that comes a lot of responsibility. You know, we're really founded on the trust that we have with our readership, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't violate that. So, you know, we certainly were not the first to do content marketing, but at the same time, that was by design. We really wanted to make sure that we got it right. So, you know, at the outset, there was a lot of negotiation, certainly with the newsroom. You know, what was it going to look like? You know, what was the font going to be? Was it going to be very clearly labeled to readers that, you know, this piece of content was paid for and posted by an advertiser and not actually written by our newsroom? So as part of that, it was also about finding the right talent, really staffing the team with folks who come from a true journalist background, and you know, starting with our editorial director, Adam Aston, who joined us from Business Week, and I'd say really to his credit as well, has really gained the trust of our newsroom with the quality of content that we're putting out there. You know, really, you know, content that is truly researched, fact-based, and rooted in true journalist best practices. You know, of course, again, paid for by advertisers, so not true journalism. But yes, very important to us at the outset to make it very clear to a reader that this was paid content, and you know, that there was no trickery or confusion involved in that.
And what's the story behind the name? Because you know, the name, unlike, and everybody kind of wrestles with this, what do we call it? And we were talking about this a little bit before we came in. Is it a studio? Is it a lab? What does that suggest? Do you put the media organization's name in there? And you guys didn't. And it sounds like there was so much discussion that went into what are we going to call this thing?
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I was actually asked just a couple days ago, so when did the name T Brand Studio come about? And you know, I dug back into my emails and I saw that it wasn't actually until May 21st of 2014. So we've only had the name T Brand Studio for roughly a year now. We did go through a lot of cycles of ideation. We started with Content Studio. We really wrestled with it because we wanted to make sure that it was clear that this was not a newsroom effort. And then we landed with T Brand Studio, which wound up in the right place, and you know, in having the word brand in it. That was very important.
So one thing you touched on that I feel like dovetails into Tyler's story, which is journalists. You guys hired journalists from Business Week and other places to come work there and produce this content.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the journey of an individual to get into this space. So Tyler, how'd you go from hard news, newspapers, magazines, digital, to branded content?
Right. I spent a lot of time as a young reporter, and maybe this is indicative of a journey of a lot of other people, maybe not. I think it is. Where, you know, when I was, I really just wanted to tell that story that nobody wanted told, and to sort of, you know, expose something and people, and really get out there and tell those stories that were the sort of, you know, secret tales that nobody wanted you to tell. And so a piece of that is still with me, but really what I became interested in as, for me as I grew up, was you spend part of your life doing that, and then you go, well, you know what, it's really fun actually to get access and then get all these materials handed to you, and then the responsibility becomes, how do you make it great? So first half, break the story that nobody wants told. Second half, get permission to tell a story and actually bear the responsibility of telling a great one and not getting spoiled by your access.
Were you doing that kind of journalism and then it just links over, there's like a little bridge over to the kind of permission you need to get access
Permission
to tell
journalism.
these? Permission journalism.
Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
Not so flattering. I was a newspaper reporter and covered cops and courts and crime, and then moved into the lifestyle section of the paper where it was more about human interest features, and then, you know, moved here to New York where I kind of worked for a lot of magazines, and the magazine was a different animal. And as an editor, you sort of find yourself negotiating a little more than you would as a hard news journalist, you know, in terms of working with the people who supply you the information. So I think it just hit a tipping point where you think about what's more important, storytelling or news breaking. And I think there's some news that comes out of brands, but for the most part, it's a storytelling mission. And for me, kind of putting my toe in the water of less hard news and seeing how hard news was shrinking in places like CNN, and all kinds of news organizations are doing more like, news entertainment, that there was a way to go do that was still honest but really creative, and that's what I gravitated toward.
Right. One thing that interests me about both the Times and Reuters, Jessica, is that unlike, say, magazines, which you were talking about, I feel like it seems a little different when news organizations covering daily news, they are the authoritative source, that they're getting into this branded content game. And I'm curious, how did you guys think about protecting the integrity of the, let me get this right, 163 years of heritage there?
Yeah, we do have these trust principles that Reuters stands by, and that we've built a reputation on for many years. But the way we have started to look at the news business and the industry is that we want to service publishers, whomever they may be. So a publisher to us could be the New York Times, a publisher to us could be IBM. And we think that they're both taking different kinds of approaches to the news, and one's been in the game a little longer than the other. But they're both trying to become journalists, they're both trying to be publishers and tell stories. And as a news organization, and an organization that is a content-first company and has built our business on just producing content in all mediums, we don't see why we can't do it for other kinds of partners.
And isn't this right that your branded content studio grew out of edit content that you guys were being asked to customize, and that then you make that step or that leap, depending on how you want to see it, to work with brands?
Yeah, I mean, we've had to evolve as a company over the years into all forms of digital media. So we started, for print publishers, and we had to move into broadcasters and to web, and now, mobile. And the kind of products that we've built, we've had to kind of adapt as we've gone on. And this kind of happened with brands where, our typical news products, which are the wire service, news feeds, source video, things like that, are really the backbone of the business. They can work for brands, and we're actually seeing more brands adopting them a little bit more now that they've kind of become savvy in the publishing business. They want the news, they want the content, they want to be relevant, but they do still need it kind of tailored a little bit more to their messaging. And so that's sort of where our kind of bespoke studio came out of.
So you touched on brands. Rena, I want to hear from you just from the brand perspective of, does IBM see itself as a publisher? What has that evolution been for just such a large organization getting into the space?
Yep, we're talking about long histories. We've been around for more than a century as well, and have had a lot of stories to tell, and have been a company about ideas and innovation, and sort of we've been telling stories for a long time. It's funny because all the lines are blurring, not only between the wolf and the sheepdog. And by the way, mutts have really strong DNA. So I think we're all figuring that out.
Of course, would know that. That's great. Watson's on the case. Yeah.
What's really interesting, a lot of media companies are becoming tech companies. Mm-hmm. A lot of tech companies are becoming content companies. So we're all learning from each other, and I actually have a journalism background. So, I used to work at Business Week and wrote for a lot of other magazines and publications. It's sort of a dream to be on the brand side, because that's where the stories start. I think we all knew that as journalists, and it's sort of interesting to collaborate on getting those stories out in whatever way we can.
Mm-hmm. Ben, I want to go to you and just get more of a perspective. We've talked about media companies getting into it, brands getting into it. So Brandtail actually collects all of this stuff. It's a fascinating site to go to, and you just recognized all the brands, all the media companies, all the brands that are on there, and it's a breadth that I wasn't aware of. How did that idea come about, and what problem were you trying to solve with that? Why do we need to collect all the branded content in a central home like that?
Sure. So we've been only around for 6 months, so I'm a little different than the rest of these guys up here. So I actually
talk again in 100 years.
All right.
Okay, we'll circle back.
We'll see you then.
Right. So I used to work at Thrillist Media Group, and I ran product there. And products obviously are a very important part of these native campaigns, just because advertisers want to see special products built into these custom campaigns and make it feel really special and make it an experience. So I was on the forefront of that, and I was kind of looking to see what cool things we could do in 2015, and I started doing research on what other publishers were doing, what brands were buying into, and I really realized that there was nothing out there that was aggregating all these new types of campaigns, and it was evolving very quickly, and we saw an opportunity to kind of start aggregating it and just putting it out there and see what happens. So we started aggregating content at the end of last summer, and we threw it all up on the web at the end of November of 2014, and it started to get a lot of traction. Stephanie called me about 5 days after we pushed the site live, so people were passing it along, and we were really trying to solve the two issues. One, giving the community a place to see all the different formats and all the different brands and publishers that were spending in the space, and then two, to kind of start thinking about what types of standards we could set around it and what type of disclosure that needs to be involved in it, since that's such an important part of content marketing or native advertising. There needs to be that divide between pure editorial and paid for content. So by kind of showcasing it all and bringing it all in one spot, we're starting to make people accountable. And then it's just a great resource for both brands and publishers as they start these campaigns and think about who to work with, see what their competitors are doing. So we knew there was an opportunity there by aggregating it, and we're continuing to figure out what other opportunities there are by having all this data. So we saw something there and we went for it.
Sure, and it sounds like the space is so dynamic, it's changing so quickly that I think you were telling me like a year ago, media companies weren't really sure how much they wanted to share about what they were doing. Talk a little bit about that shift and why you think that is changing.
Sure. So yeah, we've seen a bunch of different shifts. The way we aggregate all this content is through a few different tech methods, and it's become a lot easier in the last year because publishers have started to set standards on their own end of how they publish and disclose and tag this type of content. So just from a pure technical point of view, publishers are getting a lot better at kind of having standards and doing things a certain way. So that's been really interesting. And then from a more studio and like content studio within publishers, obviously they're all becoming a lot more public now. So publishers every week are coming out with like their version of a T-brand studio, and they're now proud of it, and they're proud that they're producing these awesome campaigns. While a year ago, it was not frowned upon, but it was, if you weren't the Times, it was a little scary for publishers to, and I'm sure it was scary for you guys too, as you mentioned, to kind of say, we're jumping all in on this and we're going to start producing content for brands. Obviously, their users and the people that read their publications are the heart of their company, so it's very scary for them to kind of start saying, like, we're going to mix in paid for content with our normal content. But now we're starting to see publishers be really proud of it and kind of open up their libraries of content. Not one publisher has asked us to take content down, so I think that's pretty telling. Actually, one publisher did 8 months ago, but they're back on the site, so I think that's telling.
They flipped.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's telling for how proud they are of the stuff they're producing.
All right, so I want to hear from the two media brands here, Reuters and the Times. Just address this question of what are the biggest challenges for media companies getting into this space? For some who are just now getting into it, what are the hurdles they have to get over? What are the issues they have to resolve? We touched on a few in terms of like labeling and the separation between the two sides, church and state, but what have you guys encountered and kind of figured out that you feel like others need to know?
What we are building is original content that is really labor intensive. And so with that comes the need to really invest. We've recently grown the team to 35. We're producing multimedia driven pieces that are heavy in development work, video, which of course does not come cheap. But at the same time, most of the programs that we've run to date have come as a result of an RFP, a request for proposal. So they're coming in from media agencies who are really used to buying your standard digital banner advertising that may have been produced by a creative agency. And so now, because of the original work that we're putting into this, there's a need for production fees to be included in media plans. So that's certainly something that we've wrestled with, have needed to educate I think our clients and the marketplace on is really what we're building, what goes into what we're building, and all of the resources that are required to really produce great work. So that's been, I think, something that's an ongoing challenge, but as the industry gets smarter about this, as there is more content marketing out there, and as we, frankly, as we have more case studies to show as well, something that I think is improving in terms of the education.
Jessica, how about you?
I think for our side, the Reuters business is, built on this recurring model, right? So we produce once, we sell it many times to many different publishers, monthly, yearly. We've had customers for years, right? Because they need our business to support their own businesses. So I think with this model, what's inherently different to Reuters is sort of the once-off mentality, where we work with customers who kind of have a campaign-based approach to custom content. And what we're out in the marketplace trying to educate some of our partners, and a lot of are starting to catch on, which is great. But the true entryway to becoming a publisher is a consistent flow of content on your properties and consistently having a voice and telling a story. Once-off campaigns can be great, but that's still a little bit more in the advertising model of things. And what we really want to do is embrace that publisher model. And we hope that brands can hopefully embrace it too, and I think they are, which is encouraging to see. But I think that's the struggle, is still trying to tell that story to our partners, educate them, and try to get them to work with us in a more consistent way, because we think we can do more that way.
What do they object to in terms of publishing more frequently or more consistently? What's the stumbling block there?
Because they're not set up the way, they're inherently not a newsroom. They're not set up to with editors and staff to oversee this content. It's a review process. It's like a brand process, and being concerned about telling a brand story properly and having to go through many rounds of review and revisions. Tyler knows what I'm talking about. Some of the brands that are starting to bring in-house editors or an in-house content team, they still want to work with outside partners because they're not set up the way Reuters is, with like our infrastructure, but they're much more nimble and they're willing to kind of pass through content more quickly. So I think it's more about their internal infrastructure actually getting staffed up properly to manage a newsroom.
Right. Tyler, what about the evolution of an agency? In your case, you're trying to figure out how to incorporate journalism into this is just the way we operate. So what's been the hard part about doing that?
I think it all comes back to earned media, and everybody pretty much here, I think, knows what earned media is. It's when you essentially earn the privilege of being reported upon or sort of covered or picked up by somebody else. That's at the heart of what we do at Edelman. It is not at the heart of what journalists do. They're on the other end of that equation. They're operating in they're the ones who are deciding what to pick up and bestow upon coverage upon the companies they cover. So that's, that real thing about putting the two different creatures in a room is that, so I think finding the right...
You just outed yourself, by the way.
I did.
You've
Sorry,
actually...
it was me.
He was the crazy alchemy guy. Yeah.
I was going to go with Thunderdome, but no, it was nicer. As a journalist, it was really fascinating to me to come into an agency that's driven by earned media. That's what Edelman is known for. And to look at how that idea of earned media has changed. So it's not only just, pitching to a tier one media outlet, it's occasionally surrounding a story in a way that a media outlet can't ignore. And at the end of the day, it really all comes down to permission. Have you earned the right to actually be covered by a company because you're already in a conversation around a subject? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're all about, and I think that was sort of the challenge to understand and embrace that idea of earned media. So everything we do now from a journalistic standpoint is informed by the idea of what will drive the conversation. Mm-hmm. What's that topic that sometimes by the time a journalist, we approach a journalist, we want them to be able to Google something and see that we're in that conversation already. We want to come up on the first page, as somebody who's not just new to this and jumping in for an opportunity, but to actually point out that we've provided a unique perspective on a conversation that we've been a part of for a long time.
But to get that earned media, to get that story, you have to have a journalist embedded, with a brand, which
It
seems like
helps.
that's a new dynamic. So talk a little bit about how your journalists are reporting inside some of those brands in ways that the brands aren't really accustomed to experiencing.
Right. So it helps greatly, I think, in this new model because, frankly, look, everybody's making content. And a lot of people are doing it. There's a lot more money going into developing content. But guess what? Like 70% of it kind of doesn't stick. And most of us sort of feel like it's not so meaningful. Most people say that. In our own sort of studies, brand share and our own trust barometer, you find that an engagement with a brand through content is, only about 30% of it really sort of means more than just a brand trying to sell you something. Mm-hmm. So how do you get laser focused, and how do you actually create something that has meaning? I think it's part science. You want to tap into the tools that marketing has used for a long time. You want to listen before you create, so you know what people are asking for before you give it to them. And I think that's something special that marketing and communications can bring to the table. And then that informs you as a journalist and gives you reason to go in and ask a brand the hard questions they may not have the answers to. If you can show them that their audience wants these answers, and then help instruct and collaborate with them, we call it collaborative journalism, to actually say, it's okay, you don't know the answer. This is good, this is new, but guess what? Your audience wants to hear it. So I'm going to ask you some tough questions, work with you on the answers, and when we decide together we've arrived at a good story, then we'll hit publish.
Right. Rena, to me, one of the core issues of all this is about, one of the differences is control. Mm-hmm. As a journalist, you're the one who hits the publish button. Your editor may change what you do, and then you go home and complain about it, but ultimately it is, it's the story that you agree upon, and that is your priority as the reader. So from a brand perspective, how do you guys get comfortable with kind of relinquishing some control over the stories that you're publishing about IBM or about some of the partners on the site?
It's something that we just need to accept. Like, if we want the stories to be better, we have to let go a little bit, and that's what we're learning to do. We partner with a lot of people, both on the back end, front end, throwing ideas around, and we want to trust that the experts that we've chosen to partner with can advise us in the best way. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard because, in a really sincere way, we have stories we want to tell, right, information we want to share because we want to help people with, solutions and ideas. So that's very challenging. But I think we're getting to the point where we know that we need to respect the experts, and that'll just make our audiences, get the information they really need.
Where do you think you are on that spectrum of being able to convince or avoid the old thinking of controlling the message and maybe kind of bigfooting with the brand and dropping it a little too much in the in the coverage?
It's a struggle. We really try not to talk about ourselves, and really focus on the ideas, and I think that's one reason that we are bringing in partners from the journalism world, or even really embedding journalists, like hiring actual journalists to be on staff. It's definitely a challenge, but again, if we know we want to tell a quality story, we have to let go a little bit and let the story come through. And I think on Tyler's point, like, to really know the audience. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about sort of brand journalism and content marketing, if you want to call it that, is that you really know your audience. You know what they're looking for.
You get the coolest toys to play with.
It's really true. It's true.
Don't tempt me. Okay, so Stephanie, I'm curious, from the Times point of view, being the New York Times, does that, even though it's T Studio, it's there with the Times, does that give you any sort of leverage with brands, any permission for them to kind of give up control so that you guys can determine the story? Because you're saying, trust us, we're the content experts here. Let us do our thing, and you'll be thankful in the end.
Yeah, I do think that because storytelling is in our DNA at the Times, while we never, once again, never confuse advertisers, we'll state that over and over because we want to make that very clear. you know, I think that there is a bit more trust, perhaps, that a brand will put in us, because we do have storytelling in our DNA, and we are staffing the team and have staffed the team with folks who come from a journalism background and who have, you know, worked at Business Week and Huffington Post and Slate and, you know, Condé Nast, and you know, they've come from that journalism background. So I do think because of that brands really are putting a bit more trust into us, which is a benefit.
Mm-hmm. Do the brands know when they come to you with an RFP? I'm going to mention a couple of stories you guys have done which have been kind of big and splashy, like the Netflix coverage that you did about kind of the state of incarceration among women. It could have run in the paper, in another part of the paper. Yep. I know it was really well received in terms of traffic, unusually high traffic. That and like the Holiday Inn video, mm-hmm. that I dare you to watch it, not tear up, because it's really compelling. But with those, I'm wondering, did the brand ask for anything remotely like that? Or did you guys have to sell that idea, and that it's going to be a light branding touch? You know what? You're actually not going to be mentioned. Trust us. Yeah. It's a great, compelling story, emotional engagement. It'll work.
Yeah, so once again, you know, keeping with journalism best practices, what we said to both brands at the outset was, do trust us a bit and know that what we kind of decide at the outset while we're in this sort of pre-sales ideation phase is probably not what you're going to see at launch. You know, with Netflix, we started out with, okay, you know, paid posts was really just getting off the ground. We didn't have a lot of case studies to show and to really be able to support it and say, you know, this works and trust us and have subtle brand mention. We started out by saying, what is this show about? It's about women in prison. So what do women in prison face? It started out with a superficial story of, you know, what do they sell in the commissary? How do they put their makeup on in the morning? You know, do they have to use crayons? What's sold? And then over the course of doing the investigative research and going out and talking to the Women's Prison Association and Piper Kerman, who Netflix gave us access to, who's of course the basis of the show and who wrote the book that the show is based off of, we found that there was really a harder hitting story there, and went to Netflix and said, you know, this is a little bit risky, but are you open to it? And certainly, you know, we've seen the payoff of that. You know, traffic was mentioned, and it was actually ranked in the top 1,000 most highly trafficked articles across our site all of last year, which, you know, is pretty amazing when you think about the fact that our newsroom publishes 300 to 350 articles every single day. So that's roughly 3 days worth of traffic. So, you know, I think especially with payoff like that and being able to now let other advertisers know of the success, you know, of really employing those journalism best practices, that we're able to do more of that.
So why wouldn't the Times want to take credit?
And what we've seen actually with our brand lift studies, because we are employing marketer best practices and running brand lift studies alongside these pieces, we're actually seeing, very interestingly, that it's actually having a positive lift and increase for both brands, both the New York Times as well as the brand running on our platform. So, you know, I think we are taking credit for it, but as T-Brand Studio, really with the recognition that we are sitting in a building that, again, has storytelling at our DNA, and, you know, really wanting to pay homage to that. And, you know, also I think, you know, our team as a whole, collectively, you know, when we work on these projects every single day, we know that the work we're doing really supports the mothership and supports, you know, journalism at its core and kind of the future of journalism.
I want to go back to the terminology for a minute and readers. I feel remiss in not actually mentioning readers until this point, because I feel like they're crucial to this conversation, because this stuff is really confusing. And I'm wondering, what do we owe readers in terms of an explanation about not just labeling, but how custom is created? Who has the final say? How much a brand is letting journalists or former journalists tell the stories they want to tell, and how much they are changing it. And this is for kind of anybody, but I'm curious, how can this evolve? This sort of reader, it's both transparency, but it's reader education.
I'm super happy I don't have to deal with this, but it's by design. You know, I am where I am because it felt honest in a really unexpected way. We do brand stories. There is no question about that. I'm working for the company I am writing about. But guess what? There's still really cool stories to tell. That's as simple as it needs to be from my perspective.
At the same time, though, I agree there needs to be more standards set with what's the difference between when a brand says, write an article for me and I don't want any input, versus a publisher writing something and the brand getting input in the final say of it, or even getting input in what's written. And I think the industry as a whole, native advertising, is still very early, and it needs to be figured out. And I think the biggest issue right now is a lot of publishers will put sponsored by this brand on content that's both pure edit that the brand wants to be surrounded by, and content that the brand actually had say in. And I think that's really dangerous when you really don't, you know the brand paid for this, but you don't know if the brand had voice in it. And I think it is going to get better. We're actually working closely with the IAB, who governs a lot of this, to kind of start looking at what all these publishers are doing, how they're labeling it, what trends are we seeing, and then what best practices can we kind of give to publishers and have them start implementing on their own sites, so we start to see some type of standard across all the major publishers, and then it kind of starts flowing down from there.
I actually want to conduct a very informal poll right now. If you could raise your hand if there's any confusion on your part about branded, sponsored, native, or custom. Or does everybody understand the different categories that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have sheepish hands. This is good. Okay. So there's some need for education even within the industry as well as among readers.
But what about content written for a brand on a brand's platform? You know, like, so, you know, like if IBM's producing content, or we have a video that you might have seen that has like lots of content marketing examples that have been playing over and over. And one of them that I found really fascinating was Casper mattresses.
Yes.
They hired Elizabeth Spears, who's a pretty well-known journalist, to run this blog, or run their content. And they have this like really beautiful content site, and they're focused really primarily on like sleep and everything around sleep. Which is actually like a big topic people discuss all the time, and I thought it was really interesting because if Casper produces an article about sleep, it might have nothing to do with Casper mattresses. It's just about I don't know, like how different sleep patterns, whatever it may be. I would trust that as journalism in its own way.
I think readers and viewers, listeners, they're getting pretty savvy. I mean, they might come into the great story, which is something we struggle with all the time. We think we're putting out really good content. We really believe in it, and we have to be really careful that there's no misleading of where it comes from. And then also, people really know they can smell the salesiness from a mile away. Yeah. I think audiences are smarter than we might think, because there is so much content marketing or branded content or custom content out there. They're starting to learn on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, in year one of the studio, if a brand came to us and they wanted to really have a product-driven message and really promote their brand, we would have actually said, we actually have, custom advertising solutions for you. We have, a ton of ways you can get your brand messaging out there, but it's not paid posts. And we've since realized.
Paid post is what? That is a term that you guys have come out. I didn't throw a paid post into this to find out if everybody knows what paid post is, because I can do another poll if we need to. All right.
So paid post is our brand of branded content. So if a brand came to us and they wanted to run a paid post about their brand, we would have turned them away, and not turned them away, but turned them onto alternative solutions that our advertising department has. So if Holiday Inn wanted to promote their rooms and their discounted rates for a weekend, we would have said, we have a custom advertising solution for you, but it's not paid posts. But along the way, we've gathered learnings, and we've learned that we don't want to force a square peg into a round hole, because perhaps you kind of lure Holiday Inn gets excited about the paid post opportunity, and then along the way wants to insert their brand messaging, and we find it's not the best fit. We now have a solution for that, and it's really just about labeling. It's a different offering, because we do want to keep those channels separate, and it's certainly to our benefit and to a brand's benefit to get their product messaging out there. There's certainly a time and a place for that, and it really just comes down to labeling and exactly how we're going to present that opportunity, so that the lines really don't get blurred and that readers don't feel kind of duped into reading something that they thought was more content-driven in nature.
So you guys, the Reuters and Times, you guys are really proud of the custom content, branded content you're creating, the paid post. I'm curious, do you talk about the fear of creating competition for your own news stories? Like all of a sudden you are competing for the same eyeballs, right? With great, well-crafted, professionally produced custom stories that I only have so much time in the day, and I'm only going to read so many stories in the day, and all of a sudden, what if 5 of those stories are now branded stories instead of independently reported journalistic stories?
Yeah, so I think again that goes to, when we find that we are creating a piece of content that does compete for traffic with our own newsroom content, that again it's a value lift for both the New York Times brand as well as the advertiser. We are constantly inspired. By no means do we mean to compete with our newsroom in terms of traffic, because really we're inspired by the work they do on a daily basis. The award-winning technology and storytelling best practices they use are what inspire us daily. So we really feel like we certainly couldn't do what we do without kind of looking to their best practices. So but it is about creating the best reader experience. So, do we want our readers to spend more time reading and engaging with interesting stories? Yes. So, we're happy if that comes from T Brand Studio or the New York Times. It's really a win-win editorial. It's really a win-win overall.
This is why we're so.
I mean, I'm up for healthy competition with the newsroom. I don't know.
I'm not. Look, this is why we focus so much on the process rather than the output. I think we want to make beautiful, great, creative work, but I think the process that I'm so focused on, and that I think Edelman is focused on in general now, is going through that journalistic process, because when you do, you have the option to turn out all kinds of different creative. And so imagine, the last thing we want to do is try and do the story before we pitch the story, or pitch the same story. But think about all that happens in that process. You're taking great photographs, you're unearthing great information, you have access that the journalists maybe can't all the time. Maybe you're in an event that the media is not invited to, and you have a videographer and a photographer there at that event, and then you want to pitch that story out of the event once you've had a chance to sort of see how it played out, and then you suddenly have a very rich set of assets you can offer the media and say, there were no media at this event. We were the only ones there, but we shot a photo that we think is just about as good as what you would do as well. Want to run it? And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen with Microsoft, where you saw the 3 great leaders of Microsoft in one place, and that story was shot by Microsoft at a Microsoft-only event, and it wound up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and deep within New York, or pretty prominently in the New York Times as well. So you don't have to end up with a thing that lives on your own site. I think you can. It's all about a process that produces great assets that have legs.
At the same time, though, I think one of the really exciting parts that people don't really realize is a lot of these awesome custom campaigns that are built wouldn't have been built if brands didn't pay for them. It gives publishers a budget that they wouldn't have had otherwise to go out and do all these really cool shoots, really cool videos, really cool investigative reporting that they wouldn't have been able to fight for the budget for otherwise. And it's also produced these really cool I'm sure Stephanie can talk about it more, but these tech and product silos that focus on branded content and focus on these awesome experiences that publishers probably wouldn't have pulled off otherwise. So I think a lot of these experiences they're really valuable for the readers reading it, and they're things that publishers wouldn't have created otherwise, and kind of even go beyond some of the normal stuff that they're producing.
I'm wondering what effect it has on the perception of the brands. Like, is there providing that inside access and maybe good coverage of something, does that then enhance their trustworthiness in the eyes of consumers? Like, is that a shift we're starting to see? Like, that's one of the just added benefits of the space.
No, it absolutely is, and in our again, like the trust barometer that we do absolutely showed that if you can tell that authentic story of innovation in a real way that actually tells the truth, then you earn trust with people. I mean, people are craving some sort of value out of this exchange with a brand, and short of offering them free product, what we found is that a great story, something they want to share because it makes them look good or smart or witty or funny, is value to them. And
it also, from the brand side, it helps the brand because it helps us actually become wittier and smarter because we're getting coached from, the smartest, wittiest people in the world. So it actually helps us tell our story better. That might lead to earned media, that holy grail of earned media, but also just internally, you can communicate more about what we do. Learning from you guys.
Yeah, we work with brands where we apply like a journalistic take on a marketing message they want to portray. So it might be like running a poll. And we at Reuters, we can leverage our polling service. We can take a poll of North America and ask a question that maybe our editors weren't going to ask, but this brand wants to ask. So we run a branded poll. And there are questions and what they want to know about Americans and where they want to travel when they retire. That's actually can be interesting to people. And they can be really simple questions, and they can be simple. The content output can be simple, but it just opens up more knowledge and information that Reuters was never going to report on, and that's okay. It wasn't relevant to the newsroom, but it was relevant to this brand, and then it ended up being relevant to consumers. And we did that for a brand, and it got picked up by the poll, got picked up by newspapers over our polls, which it depends on the topic.
And is there internal pride and competition with the two sides in terms of look how great our content's doing, even though it's branded or custom?
I think we want to just uphold the standard. So, and I think that's what T Brand Studio does and wants to do. And I think it's that Reuters has a reputation for producing excellent content. And so if we are an arm of Reuters or we're part of the Reuters organization, we need to uphold the same standards of excellence as our reporters. And that's really hard, obviously. But we try to staff appropriately, similar to the times where you have people with that same background and skill and knowledge that they can produce content that's hopefully just as good.
I want to go back to the sheep wolf for a minute, okay? I'm bringing up the sheep wolf because I know you said, look, we want to apply the same journalistic standards, but there is that tension when someone else is ultimately controlling the publish button and controlling the edit buttons, in the stories and in the videos. What percentage of it, characterize it, what percentage of it is the same journalism that we're seeing in newspapers and magazines? Or maybe there's a better way to characterize this hybrid, this version of journalism.
Well, I think it differs per assignment and per work. I mean, hopefully by the time that you're actually creating the story, you've reached this level of understanding. So call it self-editing, I guess. But really what it's about for us is the research. What does the audience research tell us that the audience really wants to hear? And so that's almost irrefutable. Unless somebody's just got something they really want to get out, and in which case, sometimes we might say, absolutely, we can make that as interesting as possible, but understand it may not be exactly what your audience is listening for. And sometimes that insight trumps the research occasionally, which is why it's a combination of the two. One siloed is not any better than the other. So I think, at the end of the day, if you have a client who wants something to come out a certain way, that is the way that it needs to be done. And if it doesn't work, then I think you can go back and everybody can adjust from there.
So when you hear journalists who are still on the edit side characterize custom or branded as easier journalism, oh, well, I can always fall back and do that. It's kind of my plan B. Do you feel like, man, they don't understand, they don't get it? You've made the transition. What's the piece that's?
I haven't heard that since 1995.
Oh.
But look, I mean, I think what I do here that's really similar is oh, there's tons of journalists in the market now. Just go hire some journalists.
Right.
It's not that easy because not all of us do so well in a room with a client. We love to call bullshit on stuff, right? It's what sort of drives us for half of our lives. And so you get a little chance to do that occasionally if asked, but You know, this is about understanding that you're not the most creative person in the room all the time. You're not the one with the answers, despite the fact that half of your career you had to go off into a room by yourself and guess at the research and guess at what the truth was and then go out and try and prove it. Like, welcome, you're not alone anymore. There are many people that have many ideas that are intellectually engaging and creative as hell. So shut up and listen a little bit.
Right. Well, how much is data, a couple of you have touched on data a little bit, how much is data driving and shaping the custom marketing that we're seeing?
For us, it's a lot. We work with a lot of clients who want research-based or data-driven content. And I think it's part of like a good way for brands to kind of segue to show legitimacy, and that they want to produce content that's based in actual fact, and that it's not just a marketing pitch or a sales pitch. And that's been really interesting, and I think a lot of good content is coming out of that on many different levels.
For us, I'd say it's a mixture of both marketing analytics, it's time spent on page, and it's page views and social referrals, but it's also the value of because this is actually living on a page in the New York Times content management system, and us looking to, once again, newsroom best practices. It's looking at what works for our readers regardless of what type of content they're looking at. So do they enjoy interactive data visualizations in combination with video, and what's kind of that right balance? And really, just even dating back a couple years ago now, it's really Snowfall still that continues to inspire the way that our multimedia driven pieces are laid out. And it's looking around corners and looking to see how our newsroom is starting to position themselves to our readers on mobile, and looking at the types of formats that really work best on mobile. So, you mentioned simple quizzes, and that's really, that's been something that we've seen has really resonated with readers on mobile, both on the newsroom side as well as on the paid post side.
There's something, this is going to sound counterintuitive coming from someone who works at IBM, but there's a little bit of danger of getting so data focused, because you really find yourself sometimes saying, oh, well, that worked in the past, or that works, and then what about new content types or new content experiences? So there's like that really careful balance between the data and the humanness that I think we've all touched upon.
Science
just
and
intuitive.
story.
Right, exactly.
Especially since a lot of the brand goals are storytelling. Like, how do you measure a campaign on one publisher versus another when some publishers are built to have a user stay on that article for 5 minutes, while other publishers are more built around having a publisher stay on an article for a minute and then jump to another article on that page? Both situations could have had similar results, but if you're just basing it off of time on page, it's difficult to really gauge that. And I think something that's going to happen in the future is more like brand studies after the fact, or while the reader's actually experiencing it, and understanding how a reader feels while they're reading it, and like, is it a positive experience, is it a negative experience, and kind of having more of a benchmark that you can compare between publishers across any different scenario, a quiz, an article, a video. It's tough to have that God metric, but I think it's going to go further towards more of experiential and how does the user feel, and is the story being told?
Little secret, we do that now. dial testing from politics is very useful in predictive content analytics.
How close are we to having ROI figured out in this space? Because I do hear about everybody's trying to figure out, how do you justify the money that you're spending on these campaigns? Who's starting to solve that? And what does it look like?
Well, we work with a lot of organizations that are very sales driven. And at the end of the day, if the content isn't driving sales, if you can't draw a line to that, maybe with a point or two in between, then it isn't seen as large a success. And fortunately, we've been able to sort of take a white paper that has 10 other lives and 10 other different type of media, and show how that ecosystem drives sales, results directly in 7 figures worth of sales. So that's I think not every case you can do that, but sometimes in just awareness is sort of what people are, and that's where, again, the sort of analytics, not only in the front end to tell you where you might go on something, but all throughout a process, and then at the end to tell you how it worked, I think is sort of exactly what we're after. I love making cool creative stuff, but not just for cool creative stuff's sake.
There's another way of looking at ROI, which is, you know, you invest in all of this great content, and how much can you reuse or repurpose? And that's one way that we're looking at it as well. So, you know.
Yeah, no, certainly, and I was going to say the same thing, which is that, you know, any of the content that we create for advertisers is, you know, fully ownable by them. We have a whole set of, you know, terms and conditions that speak to exactly how brands can use it and what will, you know, make representations and warranties about. You know, but at the same time, you know, it's exclusive content that we're creating on an advertiser's behalf that they can run on their owned and operated channels. And we've also, in year 2 of the studio, we've recently, as part of the 35 that we've staffed up, we've built sort of a mini team within the team called Content Strategy, whose specific focus is actually building content that may not even ever run on the New York Times. It actually may just run on an advertiser's owned and operated channels. You know, this team is going after and talking to brands about powering content that lives on their websites, you know, exclusively, but also together. And we recently launched a program for Discover where it lives on both places. Goldman Sachs, we created one of our earliest pieces, the interactive data visualization we created for Goldman, still lives on their website. And Cole Haan, you know, we also created an exclusive sizzle reel that just lives on their e-commerce channel. And interestingly enough, you know, speaking about ROI to that as well, they actually tracked, Cole Haan actually tracked views of ballet flats. We did a piece about ballerinas and Cole Haan's partnership with the New York City Ballet. That was kind of the perfect story to tell for them. And they actually saw that views of those ballet flats that the ballerinas who were profiled in the piece created were actually up during the length of their paid media flight. And that was probably, I would say, one of our posts that had the least branding in it. Interestingly enough, it had a very subtle Cole Haan, just text, no logo at the bottom of the page and logo at the top, and that was it.
Are we starting to see the influence of light branding touch campaigns? So that becomes a proof point so that other brands are willing to follow suit and kind of back off in terms of the branding? And
yeah. In fact, Cole Haan came to us on the heels of the success of the Netflix piece, and they said, we actually want to go a step further. So with Netflix, we did have sort of a banner at the bottom of the page that said season 2 now streaming, and we said to Cole Haan, you know, you're welcome to, you know, create a banner that has the ballet flats at the bottom and that will link to your website. And they said, you know what, we want to go a step further, and we want very little to no branding on the piece. And we did see, again, the payoff from that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's situations for strong branding and non-strong branding. I think a lot of the time it actually helps the piece. Like when I was back at Thrillist Media Group, we did a campaign with GE where we wrote all this content about the 45th anniversary of the moon landing, and then we actually, through our commerce arm, built a GE moon boot that we sold on our commerce platform, and it sold out in 7 minutes, and it was highly branded as like GE by Jack Threads moon boot, and people loved it because they thought it was a really awesome product, and it was highly branded, and I don't think it would have done as well if it wasn't branded. So I definitely think there's situations for high and low branding, and I think it's sometimes not having all the branding there actually can hurt.
I think the brand speaks for themselves. Yeah. Like, you know, some brands are trustworthy. They don't have, you know, just because they're not, you know, GE doesn't normally make moon boots, you know, like GE does a lot of other cool stuff. So like maybe their moon boots are cool. You know, I think sometimes it's just the brand.
I think that's a result of a deep storytelling effort.
Yeah.
You know, over the course of a long time.
Yeah. You know. And they're brand fans too. They're people who love
brands. Yeah.
Rena, we talked a little bit about like this idea of story saturation, and that everybody's trying to do the same thing, and well, a lot of people are trying to do the same thing in this space, engage with emotional storytelling. And what's the harm in everybody trying to do that and do it really well?
I think there's a danger of stories sounding the same. You know, again, it goes back to that being so data focused that you see, oh, this worked for this many other companies, so we need to do it too. It becomes that Me Too thing. But hopefully it'll just push brands and content creators to be better and move into the next dimension of content marketing. Or content, I should say.
Yeah.
There's too much stuff.
Right.
There's way more content than any of us could ever consume, and most of it sucks. Like, let's be honest. So that's the danger. Like, if every brand is a media company, then nobody stands out.
Well, they all wind up having the same problem that media companies have, which is we are producing dozens of stories a day. Is everybody discovering them? So how do they find these stories?
Right. How do they resonate? How do they?
I think it's finding a niche that it's focused a little bit more than the media players. You know, we're tasked as a media company with reporting on the news of the world and delivering those stories to the world. But a brand doesn't have to do that. You know, they're not tasked with covering every topic and every niche vertical within. They can say, like, as a brand, what do we stand for? What's our story? And what topic really matters to us, and how can we then be the best at covering that really niche topic?
That's probably what story matters to the people we're trying to reach.
Right,
well.
and that they have all that insight. That that's sort of like Netflix keeps producing these shows that are just, they nail it, right? Like every time, and it's because they've got all this data on their users and what do they want to watch? What are people looking for? What shows are they looking to watch? And how do they want to watch them, which is, we all want to sit and watch 24 hours worth of House of Cards in one sitting. But, they have all that data. They know exactly what people want. And brands have that. Brands have that data and that analytics, and they should apply that to their content strategy.
Right.
And brands have audiences.
Right.
We have audiences, we have fans. So, like, looking at customers or potential clients as audiences and fans,
yeah,
I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, and while certainly the same themes do tend to come up again and again, finance clients come to us, as you can imagine, a lot for a retirement-based story, technology, for cloud-based stories. But at the same time, there is no shortage of stories. Again, if our newsroom can publish 350 articles every single day, we've only published 60 paid posts to date. So there's no shortage of stories to tell, and there is a unique angle you can find for all of these.
We're going to go to questions in just a minute, but actually Ben, I want to end on you and talk about that space between. You mentioned, look, the Times Studio's done like 2 studios, 60 paid posts. So those are like the big, I kind of think it was like big enterprise stories. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the low-hanging fruit, which is you'll see on some sites like templates, where brands just plug in their stuff. What did you guys find kind of in that middle space that seemed like an opportunity to exploit?
Yeah, I mean, not every publisher is set up to do these large custom campaigns, and I don't think every publisher should be set up to do that. It's just very difficult, time intensive. You have to invest a lot of money in editors, in product, in tech, design to really pull it off in a really good way. So we really, after aggregating all these campaigns, we really saw an opportunity to allow brands to still tell their story, even if it's a very short story, in very contextually relevant spots on publishers' sites, and allow them to do it much faster and more, and kind of scale it much quicker and do it in real time, basically. While these types of campaigns, these big ones, take months to execute on. So we really see an opportunity there to kind of open up a product to allow brands to buy against different topics, buy against different content themes, and tell their story where readers are actually reading about it and focusing on it, and kind of get their voice in the conversation. So we are building a few products that are going to allow brands to do that. And we're going to be releasing them towards the end of the summer, and we're really excited just because we see that publishers need another stream of native ad revenue. They can't solely rely on these large custom campaigns. It's just too difficult to execute as many as they need to hit their revenue goals. So this is going to kind of alleviate that and allow brands to really get in a conversation they've never been able to really get into. They can post a tweet or a promoted Facebook post and have that live in the feed of Twitter or Facebook, but how can they get their 2 cents into an article that lives on a publisher site and get users to kind of understand their thoughts on a topic maybe 10 minutes after an event happens?
It's like a news sort of ad.
Exactly, yeah.
Widget or creation that goes in there?
Exactly.
Yeah,
yeah, and we would agree with that. That goes to, again, not forcing a square peg into a round hole. We're certainly ramping up our sponsorship opportunity efforts as well. So you'll be seeing more of that to come from the New York Times too. Not quite in the way that Ben's described it, but again, very clear to a reader what they're looking at.
Okay, I want to go to Q&A, but I'm actually going to kick off the Q&A with yet another question, so sorry I'm stealing the mic. But I want to start with news. CNN this week launched its custom studio. And Otto Bell is here. He's heading this up. He's right here in the front. And Otto, I actually want to throw this out to you and just find out, from someone who spent the past couple months creating a custom studio and who's also wrestling with some of the same issues of how do I protect the news side from what I'm creating for brands, what are some of the guidelines that you're coming up with to do that?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you to the panel as well. I really enjoyed hearing all your insights, taking lots of notes. It's not even, we're not even wrestling with it. It's a one-sided fight. We've got year after year after year of Pew Research, which says that CNN is the most trusted name in news. We are setting up Courageous, the brand studio, I think, to more effectively delineate between the two sides of the house, between church and state. The same people who, the same standards and practices team who consider whether or not to show a beheading are the same people who are looking at how we are labeling our branded content. That's how seriously we're taking this. And I think, for the right reasons. I mean, there's a short-term theory here which says, where advertisers are trying to bleed into editorial, trying to blur that line. That is short-termist thinking. We do not want to undermine the very reason why advertisers come to us in the first place. We will cripple and crumble our business model if we chip away at that halo which they're looking to associate themselves with. So it's as simple as that.
Amen.
Amen. All right. One more quick question. I'm dying to hear the media companies talk about this. What is the best case scenario with your custom business? You want it to grow, make a lot of money. What if it draws such a big audience that CNN becomes known for its branded content? The Times and Reuters become known for their branded content. Is this like the goal when you launch it? Like, yeah, okay, this is what we're after.
Absolutely not. No. I think the work should be of a standard, and my hope is that when my personal ambition for Courageous is that when you see that labeling, you not for a second do you pass up on the chance to click into it. Right, so when you see that sponsored, whatever that moniker is, whatever that label looks like, you're actually eager to see what this extra financing has brought to the table, what the latest experiment or activation looks like. So yes, I want it to be known for a certain standard and a high level of quality, but the idea that it will overtake the mothership is fanciful.
I like to entertain fantasies and mic questions. So. All right, I want to throw it out to you guys. Do you have any questions for our panel?
No. It seems like in the early days of journalism, journalists got devalued all of a sudden. People were talking about bloggers in pajamas taking over the media world, and now, interestingly, since brand journalism has come to the fore, it seems that the stock of journalists has gone up, that journalists are being sought after, that they're being lured away from traditional media, probably not in small part due to better compensation. And I just wanted to know if the panel could sort of speak to the change in feeling about journalists themselves and what it might mean for both the branded content world and for the traditional media industry. Thank you.
For the journalists who have joined T-Brand Studio, certainly it's kind of wrestling at the outset of, and perhaps being made fun of, poked fun of, joining the dark side, as some have called it. But at the same time, I would say, talking to the journalists on my team, it's a benefit to have the types of budgets that they get to work with to create these incredible programs that have all this multimedia content in it. That perhaps and again. Certainly our newsroom does create work along those lines, and that's what we really look to for inspiration. But not every one of those 350 stories can be a snowfall. Whereas most of the programs that we create on the T-Brand studio side do come with advertiser budgets, which is a nice thing to have, you know, when you're a maker, when you're a content creator.
I think it's great for journalists. I think that it's opening up, you know, a new. I think, you know, you go to journalism school and you think there was one path to go down, and now they have a lot of opportunity in terms of their careers, because, you know, the way we see brands as, you know, becoming their own publishers, not just advertisers or not just producing content for an advertisement. They could have their own content teams. They can produce their own media property. And I think that, you know, what's great for journalists is that I think the trend is going towards, you know, a career at a brand as an editor, you know, is just as interesting and maybe looked highly upon as, you know, a career at a newspaper.
It's important for the journalists joining the brand that it's a brand that they believe in.
Yes.
Because you can really tell in the quality of the content. You know, myself, like joining IBM, it's a company I long admired, you know, wanted to always be embedded, like truly embedded in the company, or like write a story in the past and be like, now what? The story's out in the world, now what happens at the company? I don't know. But so to make that match between, you know, sort of believing in the content that you're producing and the brand that's behind it. It's the same story that journalists had when they were going to media companies.
Yeah.
You guys watch Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
That show. So you know that scene where the guy is at the bar and Richard says to him, like, you know, you didn't have to take such a huge valuation. Like, that sort of put you on the treadmill. And the guy goes, wait a minute, I could have taken less money? And then he freaks out, right? And he says some stuff that I shouldn't repeat on a panel. Like, journalists should remember that scene as they go and feel the market out, because I think that if somebody is promising you the moon, like, you may get away with that for a short amount of time with the bubble will burst, and then, like, what are you really stuck with? You know, so I think, yeah, there's some.
On the brand side or on the editorial, like if they're a newspaper side or a brand
I
side?
think if you're a journalist considering moving over to the marketing communications or brand side, you will get a larger offer on that side, but it's ridiculous to think that, you know, it can be a massively larger offer, because that will come with its own price. I just think that's all. People who do that just don't really get the value or the sort of opportunity to grow, to attract people who want to grow something. Mm-hmm. You can offer them quicker advancement, maybe do that. You know, like, because I think that's a thing that you struggle with in journalism.
Right. Hi. Following up on Tyler's comment, I was curious if you could elaborate on some of the skills journalists might need to develop when they move over to the branded content or client service side, because like you said, not all of us are great in a room with a client.
Yeah. I think you should, you know, it helps to have gone to a shrink at some point in your life, because you learn that sometimes just the way you talk can give the wrong impression. And if your whole career is spent training on how to, like, antagonize, you know, or, you know, to sort of prod somebody in order to get something out of them, you kind of need to learn a new lexicon and a new approach. And so I think, so you have to learn how to kind of be a better listener first. And that will help you in your marriage as well. So there's a benefit to that as well. But also, I think you have to realize you don't really own the idea entirely yourself. And I think that there's this book called The Firm by Duff McDonald about McKinsey. And there's a great line in it that he said, it's Marvin Bauer, who's like the second guy at McKinsey. He has this great line where he says, you know, if you really want to, I'm probably ruining this quote, but it was like, if you really want to change the world, let somebody else take credit for your great idea. And so you got to love and hate that statement, but it's true. You know, if it's all about the idea, you're cool with letting go of it as long as you see it have a life in the world. And I think that's something journalists have to learn too, because you don't get a byline.
Well, that goes back to the collaborative journalism that you were talking about before. That I think is really interesting. That,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're kind of used to driving, and you have to let somebody else take the wheel and be okay with that.
Yeah, and I also think it's about, you know, having the right mix in the room. You know, when talking to clients, having folks who come from, you know, a background of solving marketer problems. You know, most of the time our journalists are in a room with, kind of partnered with someone on the sales side, a sales representative, as well as we have, kind of more sales-facing folks in the studio who come from more of a business background and advertising background. So I think it's, that, again, to collaboration and that perfect blend that you sort of need to kind of represent all sides.
Right. Tenaciousness comes in handy, though, with clients and brands, though. So the curiosity and tenaciousness that you have as a journalist comes in really handy on the other side.
Totally.
Yeah, you don't want to lose that. That's important to keep.
Yep.
What situation are you thinking of?
Just making everybody happy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think clients appreciate when we push back, and the extent that we share our best practices and we don't necessarily say, yes, client, you're always right. I think they appreciate when we can kind of educate them on what we see works and what really works from a best practices standpoint from journalism and having that expertise.
Got it. Okay, we're going to end it there. I want to thank everybody for coming and enjoying conversation. Thanks so much to the panel. Big hand.